Yes, thanks first for the invitation to speak here and for having been asked to write one of the contributions to this issue. It's particularly nice for me since I was the chair of the Economic Council in Sweden when we in 1994 started the Swedish Economic Policy Review, which later was transformed into the Nordic Economic Policy Review. And I also served as editor in 2017 to 19. So I'm happy to see that the review is still alive now with Rupe and Antti as in charge. So my contribution is about the particular trait of the Nordic model of wage formation, the strong coordination based on international competitiveness concerns. This has been a long tradition in the Nordics because all the economies are very heavily dependent on foreign trade. Earlier, these international competitiveness concerns exercised their influence through centralized bargaining between peak-level organizations. But over time, the model has changed into one of pattern bargaining with the manufacturing sector as a representative of the internationally competitive sector, the export sector, or as I prefer to call it, the tradable sector, concluding the first agreement in a wage round, this way determining the norm for wage increases in the whole economy. There is a strong belief among practitioners, most practitioners, that this model promotes wage moderation and good macroeconomic performance. First, a few words about how it works in the various countries. The model is very firmly established in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden since the late 1990s. Finland is different. Here, centralized bargaining, also involving the government, stayed on longer, and the bargaining system still seems to be in some form of transition. There are, as we heard from Rupe, there are great similarities between pattern bargaining in the various countries. So it is appropriate to talk about the Nordic model. Although, as you said, you took some of my points there. The Danes like to speak about the Danish model, the Norwegians, the Norwegian model, Swedes, the Swedish model. And though you are a latecomer in Finland to this, you speak about the Finnish model too. But still, there are differences. Peak organizations continue to play an important coordination role in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. The role is greatest in Norway, where they still sometimes conclude the actual agreements. In Denmark and Norway, governments are still sometimes involved, but whereas this does no longer happen in Sweden and not in Finland either, as I understand it. Mediation institutions are important for upholding the manufacturing norm. They have the strongest role in Denmark, where in case of a conflict in some bargaining area, they can link the mediation proposal with all other private sector agreements into one overall voting procedure. In Denmark, Finland and Norway, the wage norm refers to total wage increases, including wage drift. But in Sweden, it only refers to wage increases in the industry agreements, not including wage drift. Public sector wage increases, they follow the manufacturing norm in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, whereas this is obviously contested in Finland. Denmark even has a system of so-called ex-post regulation to achieve this. So that is to correct public sector wage increases ex-post if they have deviated from the norm. In Sweden, we have a lot of figureless agreements, collective agreements. especially for white-collar workers in the public sector, but still wage increases for them follow this norm. Local bargaining, important in all the countries, but most so in Denmark and Norway, where the majority of wage increases are negotiated locally, which is not the case in Sweden and not in Finland, except then for the forest industry in Finland. What has been the outcome of wage bargaining? Up to 2022, the wage share of value added in manufacturing has remained with some fluctuations, but it's remained more or less constant in Norway and Sweden. So this would seem to reflect wage rises in line with unchanged international competitiveness. Then in 2023, there were falls indicating stronger competitiveness, but this was associated with a strong exchange rate depreciations in these years. Finland, you know better than me, most of you, the wage share rose substantially in 2008 to 12, indicating then weakened competitiveness. But that has been followed by an almost equally large fall, so that the wage share has remained more or less constant over the whole period shown. Denmark, the wage share has fallen very much, but this partly reflects a shift in composition of output towards high-profit sectors. But overall, the graph indicates wage formation in line with international competitiveness concerns in all the Nordic countries. And you get a similar picture if you look at unit labor costs measured in the same currency in euro. Increases in all Nordic countries have been in line with or lower than in the euro area over this whole 2002-2023 period. Sweden stands out there with a large fall, which depends both on very high productivity growth and, of course, on the strong depreciation of the krona. Then a final indication of strong international competitiveness is the large trade surpluses in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. But the Finnish situation there is as you know, different. Now, the standard informal argument for why pattern setting by the tradable sector promotes wage restraint is that foreign competition restricts the possibilities to raise prices there. This is an argument which is easy to see if you have a fixed exchange regime, as in Denmark, or if you have a common currency with the euro, as in Finland. But this argument has also been made with a flexible exchange rate and an inflation target, as in Norway and Sweden. Then it's often claimed that there is a double incentive for wage restraint. The same incentive as in the fixed exchange rate or common currency case, plus an extra incentive because the central bank will react to wage increases threatening the inflation target by raising the interest rate. And this then causes the exchange rate to appreciate and additional falls in profits and employment in the tradable sector, thus raising the cost of excessive wage rises there. I don't find this reasoning obvious, because exchange rates are notoriously difficult to forecast. And there is also the possibility of a depreciation when wages rise excessively because of purchasing power parity thinking in the foreign exchange market. And in an inflation targeting regime, the non-tradable sector too has strong incentives to avoid excessive wage rises, because interest rate reactions by the central bank will hurt it directly by restricting demand. This is probably a more certain effect than a currency appreciation. If one looks at formal theoretical modeling, it's been hard to build a case for wage leadership by the tradable sector giving more wage moderation than other arrangements. This holds in analysis by Anna Seim and myself, by Petteri Juvonen, by Johanna Vartiainen in his earlier incarnation as an economist, which I take he's now returning to again. The result in these theoretical studies is rather that it's norm setting per se that promotes wage moderation, irrespective of who is doing it. And the mechanism is then that the pattern setter has an incentive to avoid excessive wage rises because she herself will be hurt when other sectors choose the same excessive wage rises. Why? A difficult question is why the pattern setter's wage norm is followed by other sectors. I mean, there's no law stating that. I can think of three possible reasons. One is that wage setting is a repeated game. Defectors from the norm can be punished in the future because coordination then is likely to break down, which will hurt them as well as all others. There are punishment strategies outside the usual way of economic modeling. I have met with very seasoned, very experienced public sector wage negotiators in Sweden who more or less have burst into tears when describing how they have been bullied by colleagues in manufacturing when they have tried to exceed this, the norm. Or it could be, as in Anna Sames and my analysis, that combination of comparison thinking and so-called loss aversion, that is, well, in this case, disutility from lower wage increases than from other groups, provides very strong incentives to emulate the wage increases in the leader sector. In our analysis, there are favorable high employment outcomes if norm setting is done by a small rather than a large sector. This, of course, squares with pattern setting by the tradable sector because the tradable sector is smaller than the non-tradable sector and also smaller than the public sector. But then this has then nothing to do with the tradable sector being exposed to foreign competition as in informal reasoning. Why has the manufacturing sector become the pattern setter? I think there are likely historical reasons. I mean, traditionally very high organization rates on both the union and the employer side, high coverage of collective agreements that have given this sector the legitimacy, I would say, to perform this norm-setting role. And the sector has, at least in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, built the operational capacity to do this. What then about the future of pattern bargaining? I believe it will face important challenges. And the reason is the sort of inherent status quo bias of the manufacturing sector's norm setting, where the aim is to preserve the current size of the sector. And this aim is likely to come into conflicts with needs of labor reallocation. First, aging populations imply rising labor demand in the health and care sector, which we heard earlier, at the same time as aggregate labor supply is stagnating. Second, we have rising defense expenditure in all the Nordic countries, which means higher demand for military personnel. I believe that to some extent these challenges can be met by labor reallocation within the public sector and within the non-tradable sector. But reallocation of labor from the tradable sector is also likely required. But this may be impeded by a rigid application of pattern setting by the tradables or the manufacturing sector. So instead, I think both wage rises in the tradable sector that shrink labor demand there and relative wage increases in the public and publicly financed sectors to attract labor there may be needed. And the challenge, as Rupa indicated, will be how do you square this with continued responsible wage formation. And I don't really have an answer to this. I just note that one has tried to handle this in different ways in the different Nordic countries. In Sweden, public sector unions in the mid-2010s managed to raise relative wages of their members through figureless agreement at the industry level and then leaving wage determination to the local level. But recently, this has not worked. The process has gone in reverse, with private sector wages rising considerably faster than public sector ones. And there is, in Sweden, very strong resistance from manufacturing to any modifications in the current system. In Denmark, there was in 2023 a tripartite agreement where the government provided local governments with extra funds for wage increases in excess of the ordinary collective agreements in order to make work in welfare services more attractive. Then in Finland, municipal sector unions, after a labor conflict, negotiated a wage program with wage increases above the norm, which I take have just been confirmed in the collective agreement concluded last week, as I understand it. So as I take it, the best way forward is if labor market parties don't fight about this, but if they can reach a consensus on future pattern bargaining, which combines aggregate wage moderation with the flexibility needed to handle needs of labor reallocation. Such a consensus must also involve governments, because they will have to provide the funds to finance relative wage increases in the public sectors. But to finish, I think the challenges are very similar in all the Nordic countries. I think that in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, existing systems need to be reformed and made more flexible. In Finland, I think you need to reach a stable new system that balances these various requirements. And I shall not give you any advice on this, but only warn you from trying to copy the systems in the other Nordic countries in the belief that they are perfect. They are not perfect. So I think it will be very wise of you also to do some of your own thinking. Thank you. I am there.